The person who is supposed to protect you from the world becomes the one who ends it. Rebecca Park was 9 months pregnant when her own mother allegedly cut her baby from her womb, killing them both in a basement in Michigan. This is not fiction. This is not a horror film. This happened. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Rebecca Park was 22 years old. She was days away from becoming a mother herself. She had her whole life stretching out before her, filled with all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with raising a child. But she never got that chance. Because the woman who gave birth to her, the woman who should have been preparing to become a grandmother, allegedly became her executioner instead. The details that emerged from this case in Michigan are the kind that burrow into your mind and refuse to leave. They are the kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about maternal instinct, about family bonds, about the very nature of evil. Because if a mother can do this to her own daughter, what does that say about the darkness that can exist within the human heart? Rebecca was not a stranger snatched off the street. She was not a random victim of a serial predator. She was a daughter. And according to prosecutors, she was kidnapped, imprisoned, tortured, and ultimately murdered by the two people who should have been her safe harbor in any storm, her mother and her stepfather. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. The woman who carried Rebecca for 9 months, who felt her kick and move inside her own body, who brought her into this world, allegedly became the architect of her destruction. And not just her destruction, but the destruction of her unborn grandchild as well. The charges paint a picture so disturbing that it feels almost incomprehensible. First-degree murder, torture, unlawful imprisonment. These are not crimes of passion. These are not momentary lapses in judgment. These are calculated, sustained acts of cruelty that require planning, determination, and a complete absence of empathy. What drives a mother to such depths? What psychological fractures must exist within a person to allow them to inflict such suffering on their own flesh and blood? These are questions that haunt investigators, psychologists, and anyone who hears this story. Because understanding this kind of evil feels impossible, and yet we are compelled to try. Rebecca was near full term when she died. Her baby was almost ready to enter the world. Can you imagine the terror she must have felt? Not just the physical pain, though that alone is unthinkable, but the psychological horror of knowing that the person doing this to you is your own mother. The person you called when you were scared as a child. The person whose approval you may have sought your entire life. The person who was supposed to love you unconditionally. Would you have seen the warning signs? Would you have known to run? The human mind struggles to accept that mothers can be monsters. We are hardwired from birth to trust our parents, to believe that they will protect us from harm. This is not just cultural conditioning. This is biological imperative. Infants who do not bond with their caregivers do not survive. And so we carry this deep, primal trust into adulthood, even when all evidence suggests we should not. Rebecca may have carried that trust too. Even if there were warning signs, even if there were previous incidents of abuse or control, she may have believed on some level that her mother would never truly hurt her. That when it came down to it, maternal love would prevail. She may have been wrong about that in the most catastrophic way possible. The basement where this allegedly occurred was not a dungeon in some remote location. It was in a home. A place where families are supposed to gather for holidays, where children are supposed to feel safe, where memories are supposed to be made. Instead, it became a chamber of horrors. It became the place where a young woman and her unborn child took their last breaths. Prosecutors allege that Rebecca was held against her will, imprisoned. This was not a quick act of violence. This was sustained captivity. Hours, perhaps days, of knowing what was coming, of being trapped with the people who intended to harm her, of having no escape, no rescue, no hope. The psychological torture of that situation may have been worse than the physical torture. To be so close to freedom, to know that the outside world exists just beyond those walls, but to be utterly powerless to reach it. To scream and know that no one will hear you, to beg and know that no mercy will come. What would you have done in those final hours? Would you have fought? Would you have pleaded? Would you have tried to reason with someone who had clearly moved beyond reason? The act itself, the alleged cutting of the baby from Rebecca's womb, is something that exists in our darkest nightmares and our most disturbing folklore. It is an act so primal, so visceral, that it feels like it belongs to another era, to a time before civilization, before law, before humanity learned to control its most savage impulses. But it happened in Michigan. In our time, in our world. This was not a cesarean section performed by a medical professional to save a life. This was, according to prosecutors, an act of violence that ended 2 lives. The baby, so close to being born, never took a breath outside the womb, never felt sunlight, never knew anything except the violence of its entry into and exit from this world. Do you think the mother, the alleged killer, thought about the fact that she was murdering her own grandchild? Did that register at all? Or had she moved so far beyond normal human emotion that such considerations no longer mattered? The stepfather's alleged involvement adds another layer of horror to this case. He was not bound by blood to Rebecca, but he was bound by marriage to her mother, by the social contract of family, by basic human decency. And yet, according to charges, he participated in this nightmare. He did not stop it. He did not call for help. He did not protect a young pregnant woman from being tortured and killed. What kind of relationship existed between these 2 alleged killers? What kind of dynamic allowed them both to participate in such an act? Was one the driving force and the other a follower? Or were they equally committed to this path of destruction? In cases of family violence, we often see patterns of control, manipulation, and escalation. Abuse rarely appears fully formed. It grows over time, testing boundaries, normalizing the abnormal, until acts that would have once seemed unthinkable become possible. If Rebecca had been abused before, if there had been previous incidents, each one may have paved the way for the next, until the unthinkable became inevitable. But even in the darkest cases of domestic violence, even in situations where abuse has escalated to murder, this level of brutality is rare. Most family murders, if we can use such a clinical term for such horror, are committed in moments of rage or desperation. They are not planned, they are not sustained. They do not involve torture and imprisonment. This case is different. The charges suggest premeditation. They suggest a level of planning and control that is more commonly associated with serial killers than with family violence. And that raises disturbing questions about what was happening in that household long before Rebecca died. Were there other victims? Were there other instances of violence that never came to light? Did neighbors hear anything? Did friends notice changes in Rebecca's behavior? Did anyone suspect that something was terribly wrong? The truth is that family violence often happens behind closed doors, hidden from the outside world by a facade of normalcy. The most dangerous place for many people is not a dark alley or a bad neighborhood. It is their own home. It is the place where they should be safest. Would you have noticed if your neighbor was being held captive? Would you have heard the screams? Would you have called the police? Or would you have convinced yourself it was none of your business? Society failed Rebecca Park. That is an uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth nonetheless. Somewhere along the line, systems that are supposed to protect vulnerable people did not work. Warning signs, if they existed, were not heeded. Cries for help, if they were made, were not answered. This is not to absolve the alleged killers of responsibility. If the charges are true, they made choices that were monstrous and unforgivable. But it is to acknowledge that these tragedies rarely happen in a vacuum. They happen in communities. They happen in neighborhoods. They happen in plain sight, if only we know how to look. The legal proceedings in this case will likely take years. The defense will present their arguments. The prosecution will present their evidence. A jury will deliberate. And at the end of it all, if convictions are secured, the alleged killers will likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. But that will not bring Rebecca back. It will not give her baby the life that was stolen. It will not undo the horror of what happened in that basement. Justice, in cases like this, feels inadequate. What punishment could possibly fit this crime? What sentence could possibly balance the scales? Life in prison seems both too much and not enough. Too much because it means taxpayers will support these individuals for decades. Not enough because they will still wake up each morning, still breathe, still exist, while Rebecca and her baby do not. The psychological impact of this case extends far beyond the immediate family. First responders who arrived at the scene will carry those images with them forever. Investigators who worked the case will struggle with what they saw and learned. Prosecutors who must present the evidence in court will have to relive the horror again and again. And the community where this happened will forever be marked by the knowledge that such evil existed in their midst. Do you think you could ever feel safe again if this happened in your neighborhood? Would you look at your neighbors differently? Would you question whether you really know the people around you? The media coverage of this case has been extensive, and for good reason. This is not a story that can be ignored or forgotten. It is too shocking, too disturbing, too important. But media coverage also comes with risks. It can sensationalize tragedy. It can turn real suffering into entertainment. It can reduce complex human beings to simple narratives of victim and villain. Rebecca Park was more than a victim. She was a person with hopes and dreams and fears and flaws. She was someone's friend. She was someone's daughter, though that relationship was clearly twisted beyond recognition. She was about to be someone's mother. She had a favorite song, a favorite food, things that made her laugh, things that made her cry. She was fully human, and she deserved to live. The baby she carried was more than a statistic. That child had a genetic blueprint that would never be expressed, potential that would never be realized, a future that was stolen before it could begin. We will never know what that child might have become, what contributions they might have made to the world, what joy they might have brought to others. This case has reignited conversations about domestic violence, and those conversations are desperately needed. Domestic violence is not rare. It is not an aberration. It is an epidemic that affects millions of people every year. Most cases do not end in murder, but they all involve suffering, control, and the violation of trust. We need to talk about the warning signs. We need to talk about how to help people who are trapped in abusive situations. We need to talk about why victims often cannot simply leave, why the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when they try to escape. We need to talk about how to hold abusers accountable before violence escalates to murder. But we also need to talk about something darker and more uncomfortable. We need to talk about the fact that some people are simply evil. Not mentally ill, not traumatized, not products of their environment, but genuinely, irredeemably evil. This is not a popular position in modern psychology, which tends to look for explanations and root causes. But sometimes the explanation is simply that some people are capable of monstrous acts and choose to commit them. If the allegations in this case are true, we are looking at evil. Pure, calculated, sustained evil. And no amount of psychological analysis or sociological explanation can make that easier to accept. The question of mental health in this case is complex. Were the alleged killers mentally ill? Possibly. Many people who commit extreme acts of violence have underlying psychological issues. But mental illness does not excuse violence. Millions of people struggle with mental health issues and never harm anyone. Mental illness may explain behavior, but it does not justify it. What we do know is that the ability to torture and kill your own pregnant daughter requires a profound disconnect from normal human emotion. It requires an absence of empathy so complete that the suffering of another person, especially your own child, does not register as something to be avoided. It requires a level of narcissism or psychopathy that places your own desires, whatever they may be, above the life and well-being of others. Do you think people like this can be rehabilitated? Do you think they can ever be trusted in society again? Or are some acts so heinous that they permanently disqualify someone from the privilege of freedom? The accountability of family members in cases of abuse is another crucial conversation. Too often, family members know that abuse is occurring and do nothing. They minimize it. They excuse it. They enable it. They choose loyalty to the abuser over protection of the victim. And in doing so, they become complicit in the violence. If other family members knew that Rebecca was in danger, if they suspected that something was wrong and did nothing, they bear a moral responsibility for what happened. Not a legal responsibility, perhaps, but a moral one. They had a chance to intervene, to call for help, to do something, and they did not. This is not an easy position to be in. Family loyalty is powerful. Fear of retaliation is real. Uncertainty about whether your suspicions are correct can be paralyzing. But when a life is at stake, when someone is in genuine danger, inaction becomes action. Silence becomes complicity. The societal failure to protect vulnerable individuals is perhaps the most systemic issue this case highlights. We have social services, law enforcement, healthcare systems, all supposedly designed to identify and help people at risk. But these systems are underfunded, overwhelmed, and often ineffective. People fall through the cracks every day. Rebecca may have fallen through those cracks. She may have been known to social services. She may have had contact with law enforcement. She may have sought help and been turned away or not believed. Or she may have been so isolated, so controlled, that she never had the chance to reach out at all. We will never know what might have saved her: a welfare check at the right time, a concerned neighbor who called the police, a friend who insisted on seeing her in person, a social worker who followed up on a report. Any of these things might have made the difference between life and death, or they might not have. We will never know. What we do know is that this should not have happened. In a just world, in a functioning society, a pregnant woman should not be tortured and murdered by her own mother. The fact that it did happen is an indictment of all of us. It is a reminder that we have work to do, systems to fix, conversations to have, and actions to take. The trial, when it comes, will be a media spectacle. People will watch with morbid fascination as the details are revealed in court. They will form opinions about guilt and innocence, about appropriate punishment, about what this case means. And then, eventually, they will move on to the next shocking story, the next tragedy, the next horror. But Rebecca Park will still be dead. Her baby will still be dead. And the question of how we prevent the next Rebecca Park will remain unanswered. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about family, about violence, and about our own capacity for denial. We want to believe that mothers love their children. We want to believe that families are safe. We want to believe that evil is rare and easily identifiable. But cases like this shatter those comfortable illusions. Evil is not always obvious. It does not always announce itself. It can exist behind a smile, behind closed doors, behind a facade of normalcy. It can exist in the person you trust most. It can exist in your own family. The legacy of Rebecca Park should not be just another true crime story to consume and forget. It should be a call to action, a reminder to pay attention to the people around us, to take warning signs seriously, to believe victims when they tell us they are in danger, to fund and support systems that protect vulnerable people, to hold abusers accountable before violence escalates to murder. It should also be a reminder of the preciousness and fragility of life. Rebecca was 22 years old. She had decades ahead of her. Her baby had an entire lifetime ahead. Both were stolen in an act of incomprehensible cruelty. We cannot bring them back, but we can honor their memory by working to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate. The darkness that existed in that Michigan basement is not unique. It exists in homes across the country, across the world. It exists wherever people are trapped, controlled, abused, and isolated. It exists wherever violence is normalized and suffering is ignored. And it will continue to exist until we, as a society, decide that enough is enough. Would you have the courage to intervene if you suspected someone was in danger? Would you risk being wrong, risk being intrusive, risk making someone angry in order to potentially save a life? Or would you convince yourself that it is not your business, that you are probably mistaken, that someone else will handle it? These are not hypothetical questions. These are questions that people face every day. And the answers to these questions determine whether people like Rebecca Park live or die. The alleged killers in this case, if convicted, will face justice in the legal system. But there is a larger justice that remains elusive, the justice of a world where such things do not happen. The justice of a society that truly protects its most vulnerable members. The justice of families that are actually safe havens rather than danger zones. We are far from that world. Cases like this remind us just how far we have to go. Rebecca Park deserved better. Her baby deserved better. And every person currently trapped in an abusive situation deserves better. The question is whether we, as a society, have the will to do better. Whether we will learn from this tragedy or simply move on to the next one. Whether we will take action or simply shake our heads and say how terrible it all is. The answer to that question will determine how many more Rebecca Parks there will be. How many more lives will be lost to family violence? How many more babies will never take their first breath? How many more basements will become crime scenes? This is not just a story about one woman and one terrible crime. This is a story about all of us. About the world we have created and the world we could create. About the choices we make and the choices we avoid making. About the evil we confront and the evil we ignore. Rebecca Park is gone. But the questions her death raises remain, and they demand answers. Not easy answers. Not comfortable answers. But real, honest, difficult answers that might actually make a difference. Can you live with the knowledge that this happened and do nothing? Can you hear this story and simply move on with your life unchanged? Or will you let it haunt you, as it should, until you find some way, however small, to make the world a little bit safer for the vulnerable people in it? That is the question Rebecca Park's death leaves us with. And how we answer it will determine whether her suffering had any meaning at all.